earlier in the week, we were discussing the political ramifications of President Raisi's death with our colleagues on the BN side, and they were saying, well, ultimately, it isn't going to change things too much because the power still lies with the supreme leader, with the Ayatollah. I just wonder from an economic standpoint whether we can expect any changes to the Iranian economy. The backdrop, of course, is that they're still under U.S. sanctions. Inflation is still very high in the country.
We don't expect significant changes in the Iranian economy. As you've mentioned, the president is an important role, but it's not the most important one in Iran. There's a supreme leader, which is the most important one. And also you have different military groups that play a significant role in setting the strategy for Iran externally, but also they have an increasing economic influence within the Iranian economy. So don't expect significant changes there. And externally, if you look at the region, what's happening with respect to the war, again, nothing is expected in terms of changes. If you look at oil prices today, it's lower than a week ago before the Iranian president died. And also, if you look at the geopolitical risk premium in oil prices, they're near zero now.
Yeah, which is really remarkable. I saw that in your commentary. You estimate the geopolitical risk premium in oil to be near zero. That was down from $12 per barrel in October. It just speaks to the fact that, oil investors are not so much concerned about everything that's happening in the region and its potential impact on production.
Well, I suppose we've also had more than 7 months of the conflict in the region, and we've learned something about how the different actors are reacting in this conflict. Back in October, uncertainty was much higher, and this is why the risk premium was around $12 per barrel. In April, when Iran and Israel were exchanging direct but calibrated attacks on each other, risk premium was slightly positive, around $2, but obviously much lower than October. And today it's near zero, and the death of the Iranian president has not changed that or moved that in any significant way.
I also think it's pretty interesting that Iran oil production has actually been moving up. I think many people would be surprised to hear that.
I was actually surprised by that because, yes, there was a sort of an implicit Iran-US deal last year that allowed Iran to increase its oil production. But I would have thought that after October and the beginning of the war in the Middle East, that there will be tightening of enforcement of sanctions on Iran. That hasn't happened. Production today is similar to the October level. And I guess probably the U.S. elections and the impact on the global markets.
You said it, not me. The U.S., there's an election coming up, so maybe you turn a blind eye to the amount of oil that Iran are producing. I do want to ask you about Egypt. I know you spent a lot of time looking at the country and what's happened, but, big events for Egypt in the last couple of months, namely spurred by, the international help that's come through from the IMF, from the UAE. How has that turned Egypt's fortunes around?
A complete game changer, absolute game changer. Yes, the currency did move by about 40% in March, but it has been relatively stable since. And there's been plenty of pledges, the UAE $35 billion, the IMF $8 billion, the World Bank, the EU, the UK, and so on. In total, more than $57 billion. That has helped ease Egypt's dollar shortages and actually started seeing them in the numbers. If you look at the net foreign assets of the banking system in Egypt, between January and March, that has improved by $25 billion. So we're not just talking about pledges and words. Money has actually flowed into the country. If you look at the foreign exchange reserves at the central bank, that has improved again by $6 billion over the last few months. And if you look at what markets are expecting in terms of the currency, yes, they expect a bit of weakness in the pound, but not as significant as they were thinking in January and February. So the international support was definitely a game changer.
Okay, so this tailwind has come through for Egypt, but what do you think the biggest challenges are still going to be over the next year or two?
I think so. We have to take a step back. Why did Egypt get into its latest crisis? There's an element of bad luck in terms of wars, in terms of the lifting of global interest rates, but there were also policy mistakes in the sense of reliance on hot money, which can come in very quickly but can leave very quickly, in the sense of having a not very flexible exchange rate, which doesn't react to what is happening in the economy. Building infrastructure doesn't yield economic return, and the important role of the army in the economy, which puts off domestic and external investors. So I think these are the key questions that Egypt has to answer. Money helps ease dollar shortages in Egypt, but doesn't cure the structural issues which Egypt has to address itself.
Yeah, but at least they've bought themselves some time, and that's often key to being able to enable some of these structural reforms that are important in the case of Egypt.